Okay, welcome back. Today we're continuing our review of our third BCBA practice exam, where we're going through the next 10 questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. If you're looking for this practice exam plus our other two, please check out bcbastudy.com. We also offer a full task list study guide and our combo pack, which includes everything. Questions, comments, please let me know. I'd love to help. Work hard, study hard. Let's get to our questions. This type of measurement tends to underestimate behavior. Last video, we talked about this type of measurement that tends to overestimate. This time, we're reversing it and looking for an underestimation. And when we say underestimate behavior, what do we mean? Well, we mean our data is going to indicate the behavior is happening less than it actually is. We're underestimating. Again, continuous measurement should not be underestimating or overestimating behavior, because continuous measurement, you should be measuring every instance. So immediately we can eliminate IRT and latency. It leaves us with partial interval and whole interval. So again, let's consider how are these measured. Well, with partial interval, if you have a 10-second interval, if that behavior occurs for even 1 second, it counts as a response. Whole interval, if you have a 10-second interval, that behavior has to happen for the whole 10 seconds to count as a response. If it happens for 9, it's going to look like it didn't happen at all, meaning your data may indicate a behavior is happening less than it actually did. So that being said, what type of measurement tends to underestimate behavior? That's going to be whole interval. A behavior can happen for 9 seconds out of 10 seconds of an interval and not count. That is underestimating how often that behavior is actually occurring. When we design interventions, we want our outcomes to be meaningful, socially valid, and positive. Another way to say this is we want our treatments to be blank. We're looking at our dimensions of ABA here, and we want the dimension that describes our treatments or outcomes as meaningful, socially valid, and positive. And that's not only for the client, but that's also for the stakeholders and the people around the client. Our measurement, our interventions should enact change that is positive as a whole. So what dimension are we looking at here? Are we looking at analytic? Well, analytics says we're using database decisions. We're taking data, we're analyzing what is happening with the behavior. We're not necessarily talking about the data here, what the data says, or taking data. Okay, we're talking about ultimately the outcome of the behavior we're changing and what impact it's happening on society and the client. Behavioral says we are observing and measuring a behavior of interest, an operant behavior, a public event, a behavior we can see. Again, not talking about outcomes. And then technological says whatever our intervention is, we should write it in a way that others can replicate. Again, not talking about the outcome. So analytic, behavioral, and technological all have to do either with pre-intervention or during intervention. This question wants to know about post-intervention, about the outcomes. In that case, we're talking about applied. When we say applied, we mean research enacted on humans, aiming for positive outcomes, socially valid outcomes, meaningful outcomes. Are there any ethical concerns with using a hero procedure? First, what is a hero procedure? A hero procedure is one of our group contingencies. We have independent, interdependent, and dependent. Now, with dependent, what happens? With dependent, we take either one participant or a sample of the participants, and the rest of the group is reliant on those samples or that one individual to complete the contingency in order for everyone to gain the reinforcer. For example, in basketball, if you're practicing and you need one person to make one shot so the whole team gets ice cream, that is a hero procedure. That is a dependent group contingency. So what's the problem with using a procedure that relies on one individual or maybe a sample of individuals? A, no, there are no concerns. Well, clearly just some ethical concerns with putting that much pressure and that much responsibility on a single person in a group setting. B, a hero procedure is not behavior analytic in nature. That's just false. It is behavior analytic in nature. It's based in behavioral sciences. It's derived from our principles. C, a hero procedure can lead to retaliation against the hero. Absolutely. Let's say in the basketball example, the player misses the shot. Nobody gets ice cream. The rest of the team is upset and they retaliate against the person they were dependent upon. So if bullying is an issue, if a class system is an issue, if people tend to be cliquey, you might want to avoid this type of procedure. It can lead to more negative outcomes as opposed to all positive. And then D, a hero procedure is generally ineffective. Just not true, right? It really depends. It's a case-to-case basis on the population, on how you set it up, on how you implement it. Ultimately, a hero procedure can lead to retaliation against the hero. Just the other day, Jack and Diane are playing with their son. Suddenly, their son gets up and starts walking. Jack and Diane are so excited. Walking is considered what? So in ABA, we have these things, behavior cusps, and then we have pivotal behaviors. Now, it's difficult at times to distinguish between the two, okay? A pivotal behavior is a behavior that leads to new behaviors almost, okay? New behaviors are derived from these pivotal behaviors. With the behavior cusp, we can now contact other reinforcement we weren't necessarily available before. However, with the pivotal behavior, now you're contacting other reinforcement, and behavior cusps can sometimes lead to other behaviors, okay? So for the most part, typically, behavior cusp and pivotal behaviors often go hand in hand, okay? So don't try to get too bogged down in understanding the slight differences between those two, okay? In this case, Jack and Diane's son starts walking. Well, we know it's not respondent behavior, obviously. Walking is extremely socially valid. It's very meaningful in their lives, as in Jack and Diane's life. And walking is not a consequence, it's behavior. Walking is a behavior cusp. Now that Jack can walk, his world has expanded, right? Now, obviously, when you first start walking, if we assume this kid is very young, there's a lot of safety risks that come along with it. But as he grows, walking is going to be one of the primary tools in his life, which is going to open up the world to reinforcement, okay? Walking is a massive behavior cusp, one of the most important. Which of the following is not a potential side effect of a punishment intervention? So when we talk about side effects, what are we really asking? Well, they're really asking about ethical concerns over punishment. And before we can use punishment, according to our ethics code, we must try positive interventions or positive reinforcement interventions, least restrictive interventions. If we're going to use punishment, we need to ensure that everyone on the team, including parents and stakeholders, are okay with it. And we need to document consistently whether punishment is having an adverse effect on our client. So all these are ethical concerns. We're looking for the one that is not a potential side effect or ethical concern of punishment. A, punishment-induced aggression. Punishment-induced aggression is a very real thing. If a kid in the past has no history of aggression and you implement a punishment intervention and suddenly the aggression spikes, you need to be wary of punishment-induced aggression. What about resistance to punishment? Resistance to punishment is also a real thing. With punishment, we should deliver punishment at the highest magnitude that's ethical and possible. However, as you deliver more punishment or the longer it takes for the child to be affected by punishment, they're resisting punishment. Also a real thing. An extinction burst. Very obviously, extinction burst is not associated with punishment. Extinction burst is associated with extinction. The mistake people make is they combine punishment and extinction. Punishment and extinction are not the same thing. Punishment is not extinction. Extinction is not punishment. They're two separate things. Don't get those confused. Don't combine them. And then finally, punishment losing its effectiveness. That is a potential side effect. Eventually, they might satiate on the punishment. We might have to unethically introduce more punishment or switch the punishment up, but it can happen. So of the following, which is not a potential side effect, extinction burst. After spending 3 weeks in Japan, you don't eat Japanese food for a month. You just don't enjoy it during that time frame. 3 weeks in Japan had what type of effect on your behavior? All right, let's be careful here. When we're talking about motivating operations, which this is a motivating operation question, we need to think about, are we asking about the consequence or are we talking about the behavior? With consequences, we establish or abolish consequences. With behaviors, we evoke or abate. In this case, it says, what is the effect on your behavior? So we're not establishing and abolishing behavior. We're either evoking or abating behavior. So this 3 weeks in Japan, you come home, you don't eat Japanese food for a month. So you've your behavior of eating Japanese food has done what? Well, it's temporarily decreased. Like we said, we're not worried about the food here or the consequence. We're not establishing or abolishing the food. We are, but we're not asking about that. Okay, we're asking about the behavior. So is our behavior being evoked? Is this an evocative effect or an abative effect? Well, clearly it's an abative effect. You don't eat Japanese food for a month. Your behavior stops. Your behavior is abated due to the MO of being in Japan for 3 weeks. The most important thing we need to remember is, are we talking about the consequence or are we talking about the behavior? What best describes a backup reinforcer? Backup reinforcers are predominantly used with what? With token systems. You earn enough tokens, you make the exchange, you earn your backup reinforcer. It's typically how it works. So what one of these best describes that backup reinforcer? A reinforcer you use when another reinforcer is not working. That's not it, right? It might sound good, right? That sounds like the backup reinforcer, but when we describe backup reinforcers, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about items you can exchange for other conditioned reinforcers like token or money. B, a reinforcer that is used in an exchange. Yes. So if you go to any store and you buy any product, okay, if you're exchanging money for a product, that product is going to be the backup reinforcer. The money is the conditioned reinforcer you receive from your income, wherever you make it, and then you exchange it for your backups. The tokens are received for positive or target behaviors. You exchange the tokens. The backup is the reinforcer used in the exchange. Or more, you can more probably technically say a reinforcer that is earned in the exchange, but either way works. C, a reinforcer that is less effective than a primary reinforcer. Well, not necessarily. Just because it's a primary reinforcer doesn't make it more effective than a conditioned reinforcer. Okay. Money is one of the most effective reinforcers in the world, and it is not a primary reinforcer. It is a secondary reinforcer. And then D, a reinforcer you only use in emergencies. Again, just not true. Careful with this wording of backup. We're just talking about a reinforcer used in an exchange or exchanged for another conditioned reinforcer, typically tokens or money. Regardless of the order, to win a prize at the carnival, you must knock over 3 milk bottles and hold your breath for 1 minute. What type of schedule is this? Immediately, you should recognize this is a compound schedule of reinforcement. So let's look at our 2 basic schedules that make up the compound. Okay, you knock over 3 milk bottles, meaning a FR3, and you hold your breath for 1 minute, and F by 1. So we have a ratio schedule and we have an interval schedule. And we have to meet both schedules, not in any particular order, but we have to meet both schedules, okay, in order to earn reinforcement. So is this an FR? Well, we have an FR, but it's not just an FR, right? It's a compound schedule. So we need to look for a type of compound schedule. An alternative schedule would be either or, meaning either you do 3 milk bottles or you hold your breath for 1 minute. We have to do both. This keyword and, okay, we need to do both. So we're actually looking at a conjunctive schedule. You have to do both the ratio schedule and the interval schedule in order to gain reinforcement. A multiple schedule is just when you have multiple basic schedules that function at a random time and you present them in a random order. Okay, that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at a conjunctive schedule. Okay, you must complete both the FR3 and the FI1. Whenever Crystal studies for the BCBA exam, she studies for 10 minutes straight, takes a 5-minute break, studies for 15 more minutes, takes another 5-minute break, and then studies for 10 minutes. What is the IRT for studying behavior? Okay, question is asking about measurement, specifically inter-response time. And as we know, inter-response time is the time in between responses. So in this case, our response is what? Studying, right? So we see she studies for 10 minutes straight, takes a 5-minute break, studies for 15 more minutes. What is the inter-response time there? Time in between studying, 5 minutes. First response of studying ends, 5 minutes passed, second response starts. Again, 15 minutes ends, another 5-minute break, then studies again for 10 more minutes. So again, 5 more minutes. So what is the IRT for studying behavior? Well, clearly she takes 5-minute breaks in between. The inter-response time for studying is going to be 5 minutes. Very straightforward question. Finally, Chandler is supervising Phoebe. They work together at an ABA clinic for children. During supervision meetings, Chandler will say things like, I think you are doing well based on what I have heard. What is the problem with this? What does the question want to know? Well, it wants to know what the problem with Chandler's behavior is. It's an ethical question. Okay, so what is the problem with this? So we know Chandler supervises Phoebe. During meetings, Chandler says, I think you're doing well based on what I have heard. Is Chandler actually observing Phoebe, or is Chandler getting some indirect assessment feedback? Chandler looks like to be doing more indirect assessment of Phoebe rather than direct. And that is not good supervision, neither on the client or one of your supervisees. So A, nothing, this is good supervision. It's not, it's just not empirical, okay? Chandler has not actually observed Phoebe. He should not be saying, well, you're doing well just on what I've heard. B, Chandler should not use indirect assessments for feedback. Well, not necessarily. There's nothing wrong with indirect assessments per se, but when you use them alone, that's a problem. So C, if Chandler is going to use indirect assessments, he also needs direct data to evaluate performance. Yes, use your indirect assessments, that's totally fine, but also have some direct data or some direct observation to say, this is what I saw. This makes me think you're doing a good job. Or this is what I saw. I think you need to improve here. And then D, Phoebe should be assessing Chandler. Sure, right? But not necessarily in this case. The problem here is Chandler just used indirect assessment, not both. If Chandler is going to use indirect assessments, he also needs to direct data to evaluate performance. Okay, thanks for watching. We'll be back with our next video soon. Please stay tuned. Check out BCBA Study for all our study materials. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.